So I would like to welcome you this afternoon to the Fort Worth HR Emerging Professionals Committee's second installment of our webinar career series. And this session will cover diversity, equity, and inclusion post-pandemic. I want to thank you this afternoon for spending time with us today. My name is Kenya Wilson, and I'm the Director of Emerging Professionals for Fort Worth HR. And I, along with our committee, we have Megan Halpenny and Jim Tam, who has helped put together this series. We would like to welcome you, and we are excited to bring to you our speaker of the day. Before I introduce our speaker, I would like to go over a few things. If you have any questions during the session, please make sure that you funnel those through the chat area, and our team will be sure to share those questions forward to the speaker to answer any questions that you have. And we will also have a dedicated time at the end of the session to address any questions that you may have for our speaker. Finally, make sure that you are sure to stay tuned after the session, briefly after the speaker speaks, for information about Fort Worth HR upcoming events, including our other sessions in the career series and in any additional opportunities provided by Fort Worth HR. So now to the reason why we are all here. I would like to introduce our speaker for today. And I want to tell you that I am sure you are in for an informational session that is engaging with someone who has extensive knowledge in this area. Judy So is an award-winning professional with deep experience in culture change, leadership development, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. She is known for her commitment to shifting mindsets and consciousness so humans can flourish. Her interests include exploring cutting-edge approaches to change, such as Theory U and social presencing theater, as well as the use of VR for pro-social behavior. She has over 28 years of experience in the areas of executive coaching, facilitation, training, instructional design, organizational and cultural change consulting, product development, and qualitative research. Over the course of Judy's career, she has worked internally and externally with a wide range of organizations, including commercial companies, governmental agencies, the armed forces, consumer packaged goods, aerospace and defense, and in academia. Outside of work, Judy enjoys travel and is a big foodie and enjoys cooking across cuisines, including Asian, French, and Cajun. She holds a master's degree in applied anthropology from the University of Maryland College Park, and bachelor's in economics from Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. She is also a PCC certified coach through ICF, a certified mindfulness teacher, and she is also a certified master facilitator through the International Institute of Facilitation. I would like to welcome and present to you all Judy So for our presentation today. I'll hand it over to you, Judy.
Thank you so much, Kenya. It's really a pleasure to be here today. And so let me tell you about our little journey for our lunch presentation today. Thought I'd start out with just some DEI definitions so that we can be on the same page around DEI. Also talk about trends that we're seeing in this whole arena. I'm going to talk about a classic DEI mistake that organizations make. And then for the latter part of our time together, we'll talk about how do you move into a DEI role, or how do you take on more DEI work in the course of your HR career. So that's our agenda today. And feel free to chat as we go along or come off mute if you have a question. And we'll also have some time to do some breakout discussions in smaller groups today too. So the disruption that's happening, it's everywhere, whether it's climate crisis and fires, the war in Ukraine, the economy going up and down, inflation, there's just so many things happening. And so when we look at DEI, I think the great question we can ask ourselves is how we're going to leverage our diversity, our human diversity, so that we can solve all these, what I would call big, hairy problems in our world. And so we've got to be able to leverage that diversity. We've got to be able to create an inclusive environment so that everybody can participate, so that all the best ideas can be brought to bear on this, set of large problems that we have. So I think it's always good to look at our definitions for things, DEI, and now people are saying DEIB for belonging. What are all these terms about? So diversity, we can look at as this is all the wonderful richness that we can express as human beings. This is all of our dimensions of diversity, and there's so many: our worldviews, our perspectives, how we grew up, the cultures that we were brought up in, all the different mindsets and beliefs, religions, race, gender, sexual orientation. There's just so many categories. Now we talk a lot about neurodiversity, how we think differently, how our brains might be different, physical disability, it goes on and on. All of our various hobbies, interests, there's languages spoken, right? We have all this mix. So we can benefit from the richness of all that mix. But that we cannot do that unless we can create an environment of inclusion. And so inclusion is, how do we manage all of this diversity? How do we benefit from it? And so today we'd like to, and let me just ask everyone to mute if you could. I can mute. All right. And so we've got behavioral inclusion and we have structural inclusion, and we need both. So what do these terms mean? Behavioral is where often many of our organizations spend a lot of time. This is where we undertake conscious inclusion training. We teach people about bias. We ask people to treat each other with respect and dignity. This is all the behavioral side. How do we interact with each other? How do we use an inclusive mindset? How do we treat each other with dignity and respect? We spend a lot of time here. How should leaders treat employees? So behavioral inclusion is absolutely important. It's a place where many companies invest money, and it is not enough, because we also then need to look at structural inclusion. That's all of our policies, rules, procedures, ways of doing things, laws, etc. If we don't look at our structures, the issue with our structures is we have embedded inequity, embedded unfairness in our systems. And so, even as we talk about artificial intelligence and AI, what is embedded as biases into our algorithms? So we have to look structurally too at where the bias might be living. So it's not enough just to look at the behavioral side, we have to look at the structural side. And then we have these two terms, equality and equity. And these terms, equity becomes a term that we talk about a lot today. And let's make sure that we know the difference between the two, because I think these distinctions are important. So a lot of times people say we want equality. And so when I think about equality under the law, I would like to be treated equally based on whatever the law is. Everybody would be treated equally and in the same way as it regards that law. But equity is a little different concept. Equity suggests that everyone's not the same, and we don't all start with the same set of resources, the same set of social capital, etc. So I like this example. Let's bring it to the physical level and illustrate what these two terms mean. And you may have seen this type of illustration, and there's several other ones out there that all seek to explain the concepts in the same way. So we might say, let's give everyone in the company, whatever your organization is, let's get every person a bicycle to work, let's say. Now, if we're looking at equality, we give everybody the same size and model of bike. Now, the issue with that is everybody doesn't have the same physical condition. So the person in a wheelchair cannot ride a bike. The person who's super tall might find the bike too small. We used to have women and men's bikes. I think most of them are unisex now, but we have a child. The child can't ride an adult bike. So if we give the exact same bike, we can say, yeah, we've given you exactly the equal same bike, but that's not meeting people's needs because we all have different body types and body physical situations. So when we look at equity, we are wanting to make sure that the outcomes are fair. So if the outcome we want is that everybody can ride their bicycle to work or school, then we've got to get each person a bicycle that meets their needs. So a person who cannot use their legs can have a hand cranking bike. A person who's super tall can have a really large and tall bike. A person who's a little smaller can have a smaller bike. A child can have a child-sized bike. Then we have equitable outcomes. The outcomes are fair. And this also suggests that each person has different needs, different circumstances, starts from a different place, right? So in our work around inclusion, we've got to look at both equality and equity. Both of these concepts are important. So let's look at some of the trends that are going on in the space right now. So I sort of set this up as what are the common actions and activities and things we see companies doing. And then I ask the question, now what are the results? Because there can be lots of activity, but that doesn't mean we're getting the results we're looking for or the outcomes that we're looking for. So what are companies doing? Lots of companies are going after different external awards. Be the best place to work for women, be the best place for underrepresented populations, be the best place to work for moms, as example, right? A lot of companies have been hiring a chief diversity officer. And I've got Rachel here saying she doesn't see anything on the screen. And I'm not quite sure, does everyone else see stuff on the screen? I think so. So Rachel, I don't know if you're coming in perhaps from a browser or whatnot, but it should be working in terms of the slides. So ever since George Floyd happened, when he was murdered, lots of organizations decided that they needed to hire a chief diversity officer. So a lot of companies have done that. Companies have representation goals they're setting up for both the board, the executive level, and throughout the organization. Some organizations are adding belonging to their DE&I. A lot of companies are providing unconscious bias training. And we're also seeing companies giving different incentives for DEI results. So tying those results to bonuses, as an example. Now, those are lots of activities. Then the question is, what are the results? And so I think when we look at results, we got to ask a number of questions. One is, what are organizations tracking as data? Because if you're not tracking the data, then you don't know if you're making any changes or any progress. Another thing we're seeing is organizations might have data. Is it the right data? And then are you sharing the data with your decision makers? So for example, if you're increasing representation, do your hiring managers have that data and are able to action on that data, right? To improve those numbers. Lots of organizations are hiring lots more diverse candidates, hiring a lot of women. But then the question is, what are the retention numbers? I see a lot of people leaving organizations too. So if we're hiring lots of people, but we can't keep them, we are expending a lot of effort and not necessarily getting the result we want, because we want people to stay. We don't want them to just come for 2 years and leave. We have organizations that are doing inclusion surveys. But on the surveys, people there are patterns on the results, and people are responding, I don't feel like I have opportunities to grow and develop. I don't feel like I'm supported by my manager. Maybe I don't feel like there's opportunities to be promoted, etc. We know that time to promotion in organizations often can be longer for underrepresented groups. So that's a flag. What's going on there? Points again to sort of equitable systems. How are we promoting people? What are the criteria we're using? Are those fair and equitable? Leaders at all levels are not necessarily being held accountable to DEI goals. So organizations will say, we have these 3 DEI goals, but then what are we doing to make sure we're achieving them? And are people incented to do so? And then lately, this trend is a little bit worrisome to me. We're seeing a lot of chief diversity officers quitting. And so that makes me wonder, all right, what's going on there? Are they not given the support to make change? Are they not given resources, people, and budget to make change? Some DEI leaders don't report to the CEO, so maybe they don't have the rank and power to be able to make change. So questions arising. So with all this, that's sort of the bucket of all the kinds of trends, or some of the trends, I should say, that are happening in the world. And now what I want to do is talk a little bit about one of the DEI mistakes that companies can make. And one of those is they concentrate on the external message. Let's see, I've got, can you say, yes, some organizations may implement surveys without a plan of action to address results. Yes. So now you've floated up all these issues, but then what's the plan to address them, right? There's no second part. We've surveyed everyone. We know what the issues are, but then what's that plan to make change? So concentrating on this external message while neglecting the internal work necessary to make a culture change. This is a classic mistake. And you see chief diversity officers are hired and they're asked to go win us some awards, right? So what's the problem with this? Well, we can have lots of awards. Here's some of them, right? Top companies for diversity and inclusion, best employers for women, best places to work for LGBTQ+. So it's great to win an award. That's wonderful. But what happens when the employees join the company? This is where the rubber meets the road. So here's some comments from Glassdoor on what people find once they come into the company. They're overworked, they have no team support, and no sense of belonging. Manager quality is high variance, and there are plenty of bad managers. There's no room for advancement or cross-training. There's a lack of opportunity for development. Bureaucracy and favoritism is rampant. Seasoned employees are stuck in their old ways. So if we enter this organization that has this long list of awards, but we hit all of these barriers where we don't feel supported or included, guess what? People are out the door. So this then brings us to what is it that we really need to be doing? So this is that whole model of inclusion, and it has both inclusive leadership at the top. You know, the leaders need to have vision. There needs to be accountability and role modeling, which means the leaders need to do their work and the very top leaders need to do their work. We've got to look at the structural inclusion, the behavioral inclusion. We're using our surveys, our diagnostics to understand what's going on and to be able to drive change. You know, ultimately, if we're going to do it, work around inclusion, we have to ask the question, what's the culture we're in? And what are the parts of the culture that need to shift? Because ultimately, that's really the work of inclusion. What is the kind of culture that has everybody feel like I can bring my ideas, my perspectives, my life experience to bear on the work? And if I'm not supported to do that, or if I've been sent messages not to do that, not to bring my whole self, right, then we're not going to benefit from diversity, and we're not going to have true inclusion. So here are some questions we can be asking, right? So again, one of the things people are doing is they're increasing the diversity of hires, but then once people come into the company, what are the pieces that are missing in the culture? So this is a breakdown of some questions you could be asking your organization to see how are we doing. So leaders, do the employees feel valued, respected, and supported by their managers and leaders? And are leaders doing their own work? Because leaders have to grow and develop in this area too. Belonging, do people feel like they belong? Innovation and speaking up, do you feel like there's psychological safety? Can you speak your mind? Can you bring your different life experiences to bear? Different ways of showing up, different personalities, right? If that's not there, then people don't speak up, right? Psychological safety is kind of the thing you need to have on the ground for people to speak up. Power, how is power used in the organization? Is it extremely hierarchical? That type of culture too shuts people down. If I've got to wait for approval from somewhere else, I'm not going to bother to input, right? Equal access. Do people feel like they have equal access to opportunities? Do people have mentors and sponsors? And then fit. Fit is one of those things whenever I hear a company say, this person does not fit, then of course my little inclusion little flag comes up, right? Well, what do you mean by fit? Is there some particular personality you're expecting? Is there some profile you think is like the best profile? Because if you have an image, then we're not being inclusive, because there shouldn't be some tight or narrow notion of fit. So often if you hear that question, or you hear someone say, well, this person does not fit, right away, you can be asking a question. Well, what do you mean by that? Can you define fit? And what are the criteria? What does that look like? What are the behaviors? What are the mindsets? If people can't articulate that, that's a flag. And if they do articulate it, then the question is, let's say they say everybody needs to be an extrovert. Well, why does everybody have to be an extrovert? That's not necessary for the work, right? So whatever those criteria are, then you can sort of question those criteria. Why only these characteristics? So I'm going through a lot here. Structural inclusion. These are just some questions you can ask on the structural inclusion side. How broad are the sources for candidates, right? We're looking for people. How broad and wide are we searching for people? How are we writing our job descriptions? Are they inclusive? When we're interviewing people, what are the mitigations for bias? Are we making sure we have a diverse panel of interviewers that have lots of different life experiences and ways of seeing the world? So that, and then we have a very diverse panel of candidates. Who are we extending offers to, and who's accepting those offers? You can look at those stats. If you're not capturing those stats, then that goes back to that data question. Let's go find the data. Let's go capture the data. Does everyone feel like there's equal access to mentor sponsors and opportunities? Is the pipeline for our succession planning diverse? What's the time to promotion for each demographic group? And so companies who haven't been collecting more fine-tuned demographic data, then you need to collect that, because otherwise, again, we can't ask the question, are our structures fair? Are our policies and processes fair? So here's just a little bit more on the shifting of culture. What you can do, look at your psychological safety and trust, encourage speaking up. Shifting, a lot of companies are trying to shift from very strong hierarchies to really sharing the responsibility, moving to flatter models, pushing decision-making down in the organization. A lot of companies are talking about empowerment, but it's very difficult to empower people if you've been in a very top-down structure, because everybody has to now trust letting go of some of that and letting decisions flow lower down in the organization. So that's a big culture shift. Mitigate the negative differences of power. I'm not spending a lot of time on power today, but it's one of my favorite topics. Who has power, and how does power affect all of our conversations? Because power is one of those topics people don't want to talk about. But if we're going to look at inclusion, we've got to look at how people use power, how people are sharing power. If someone more powerful comes into the room, does everybody just become quiet? Because then you know their power dynamics, and it's preventing speaking up, it's preventing innovative ideas, it's not creating an inclusive environment, right? So we got to look at power. Power is there. Power can be used for good, or it can be used for abuse and harm, right? So how do we use power for good, and how do we look at how power is being utilized in the company, and are people paying attention to their own power, how it's being perceived, and how it's being used? And then allyship is a big conversation in different companies. How do we help people be a good ally to each other? And then instead of asking this question of culture fit, let's move to the question of culture add. What does the person add to our culture? What are they bringing that's different and wonderful and will add to our mindsets and our perspectives? So instead of you've got to fit into the culture, we change the question to what are you adding to our culture that we don't have? That is the positive way to really leverage diversity. And then how do we support everybody on the team in an equitable way? And thinking about equity, and thinking about that each person is an individual and may have differing needs from each other. Okay. And then we're going to get to the how you can move into DEI work yourself and open it up to conversation and breakouts in just a moment. But I just wanted to do one quick thing on measurement, because measurement's one of those places where we can have lots of goals and objectives, but if we're not measuring and holding people accountable, we're not going to have change. So data transparency is a big item. A lot of companies need to be transparent with their data, need to share the data with those that make decisions, for instance, hiring decisions. We need to have the cuts of the data that are going to allow us to cut and sort the data. And if we don't have those cuts, we need to collect the data with those cuts. Regularly look at our measurements, right? Sense of inclusion. People are doing inclusion indexes in their engagement surveys. So looking at how that's changing, having each leader have their own results and be able to say, oh, look, I'm either doing well on inclusion or I'm not doing that well. What do I need to improve? And then again, this goes back to, if we're not holding individual leaders accountable in terms of performance goals and incentives, then it's just a lot of talk and not a lot of walking. All right, let me stop here. Let me just open it up right now to comments, questions, discussion. I just presented a whole lot of stuff really fast, so love to hear from folks. If you just want to come off mute and just discuss, talk, we can have a little bit of dialogue. And also welcome people to come on camera if you'd like.
I've got a question. I'm Kelly Shields. I'm from Trinity Metro in Fort Worth. But so we talk about, these are the things that we are looking for. Here's outcomes that we need. The trends, I think, it is great. But how do we? All of our policies are pretty good as far as adding, inclusion and diversity, and so I think we've kind of tightened up all of our policies, our practices. I think you mentioned the behavioral part or the structural part, but how do we keep it on the forefront of our employees' minds on a day-to-day basis? We have a DEI committee, but short of sending out, hey, it's Pride Month, and these are things that we can do. What else can we do to kind of keep it in the forefront of everybody's minds?
Yeah, I think you ask a very good question. I think what it leads to is a lot of people have this sort of mistaken notion that DEI is sort of another set of activities we have to add to our plate of, very full plate of activities. And so I think, Kelly, one of the things you can ask working with the DEI committee is, how do we reposition everything as this is part of what you do every day? So inclusion is part of every meeting you hold. So as you're running a meeting, is every voice being heard? Are we creating psychological safety in every meeting, right? DEI is part of every business decision, every activity in the company. It's not something over to the side that, we do when it's Asian Heritage Month, right? Which is sort of how some people think about it. Like it's a celebration. It's a thing we do this month. No, inclusion is a philosophy that's embedded into every business activity you have. And so one of the questions can be, do we have a diversity of opinion for this particular team? Or do we have diversity in thought as we're making this decision? So whether it's hiring, whether it's a budget decision, whatever it is that in our mind? Because it ultimately becomes built into everything that you do. It should not be this thing you do over to the side. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And I think we're good at doing that from a leadership standpoint. But I guess my question is more, how do we trickle that down to the rest of our workforce?
The rest of employees.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, one of the things you could do is ask your leaders kind of how are they embedding this topic into sort of the beginning of every all hands, the beginning of every, weekly meeting, right? And make it kind of a topic of bring it to the employees. What do you see we need to do to increase inclusion? And get employees participating in, how does this look on a daily basis? And the leaders can bring that to bear. Right. So even if it's how are we making sure we're having more innovative ideas in each meeting, let's ask our employees to participate in that thinking too. They're going to have ideas. So you might want to turn it to ask your leaders to turn it to the employees to start thinking about this more on a daily basis.
Okay, great, thank you so much.
Sure, absolutely. Others, comments, thoughts, reactions to trends?
I think this is great, Judy. I know we had some preliminary conversation before the session started regarding some of the recent legislation, especially in the sector that I'm working in public education, and Texas, with Texas recently banning DEI programs. So I wonder, I can't help but wonder what this will look like for not only students enrolled in public education, but those in HR departments, and other faculty and staff, as we try to make sure, because I think it was a very focused bill that was passed to ensure fair practices in hiring and merit-based admissions and scholarships. However, I think that can veer into dangerous territory when we consider the safety and, as you said, some of the transparent practices to ensure that all individuals are able to succeed, that they are able to promote. So I wonder how that legislation just may affect all of these strategies that you're including going forward. I just thought I'd make mention of that, because it is an interesting territory that we're walking into.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest discussion topics, right, that's arising now. How does that affirmative action ruling, which was specifically a ruling for universities, colleges, and academic environments, what does that mean for the corporate world or for workplaces? And so we don't know yet. That's a great question. I can't say I have a specific answer, but I do think, some initial thoughts that come up are, there's nothing that precludes us from saying we want to have a diversity of experiences, backgrounds, and worldviews in terms of who we're hiring. So there's lots of ways to ask questions in terms of understanding what are the diverse experiences people have. And so if we're committed to really having diversity and having people from all walks of life across all the cuts of dimensions of diversity, right? There's nothing that precludes us from asking for that. So I don't have the actual ruling or the language in front of me, but I think even some of the justices refer to that. So just because the ruling says that colleges cannot make a decision on race, we can still ask, what are the diversities that we want to look for? And that can be, you are the first kid to go to college in your family. That's a diversity, so that we are wanting more people to engage in higher education. We can ask, who's had the socioeconomic ability to afford education or not. We can look at various cuts of diversity to say, all right, we want some of everyone in our student body. And I think we can use that similar philosophy for, we want a workforce that's very diverse. But yes, I think the jury is out, as they like to say, on how this might be shifting and changing our landscape.
Thank you.
So no real answers, but I think it's something we all need to keep discussing, because we want to have the diversity in our student body, in our workplaces, etc. Any other comments, questions, thoughts? So let's move on to the next part, which is really kind of getting at this question of, if you're interested in moving into DEI work, whether you are new to the HR field or whether you are a current professional, we can look at, some things to think about. So I I framed this up as preparing for the work, and it kind of goes back to that classic DEI mistake where, we look externally, but not internally. And I think when we as individuals do this work, we also need to think about what's our internal preparation. So I've got some questions for you all to consider from the standpoint of internal preparation. And then I also have some thoughts around, building that knowledge and experience. And so when we're in the DEI space, right, like many things in HR, right, we're dealing with people and we're dealing with ourselves. And so from the standpoint of our own preparation, one of the questions I have is, what are your practices for staying grounded, calm, and resilient? Because the DEI space can be sensitive, it can be challenging, it can call for lots of our emotions, just like much of HR work too. So I think preparing yourself for DEI work is similar to preparing yourself overall for HR work. It's a people business. And so you want to be well prepared yourself, and you want to have a set of practices around self-care and taking care of yourself so that you have the energy to do this work, because all of this work takes energy, and we want to stay healthy as we do this work. What is your approach to conflict? If you don't like conflict, you don't want to do this work, because conflict is by nature a part of human beings, and it can be a part of DEI work. How do you stay open and compassionate? There's lots of differing opinions. So you want to be able to stay in a compassionate space. And then what is your own internal work when it comes to understanding your identity, your privileges as we do this work? Because identity is often a part of this work. So doing your own work and understanding where you're grounded, what's the space that you're in, what's your set of life experiences, and how does that relate to the work overall? And then when it comes to building knowledge, right, there are formal ways to approach getting more knowledge in the space, and then there are on-the-job ways to get more knowledge. So certainly there are related fields of study that can help you in this work, right? Whether you study psychology or sociology or anthropology, or some of the related fields like ethnic studies or women's studies as examples, there are different related fields that can help, or even studies around religious studies, spirituality. All of these can help you in this space. Then, of course, there is ever more DEI coursework. Maybe Kenya can talk about some of that. And I've also put some links in the deck on the various certifications that exist now that weren't there before around the DEI space. And then thinking about the question of what are the activities that you can take place or participate in internal to your organization. So where are the employee resource groups? Can you go support those or lead some of those? Are there DEI committees that you can join and work on? Are there different learning efforts and you can be one of the facilitators? So in one of my previous positions, we trained all the HRBPs to do some of our unconscious bias training. That not only supported growth for each of the HR professionals, but that enabled us to have facilitators to train our leaders. So you might participate in being a facilitator and teaching some of the topics in this realm. That's going to help you grow, and that's also going to help the organization. And so on this next slide, it's just some of the certifications that are out there. I made a list of some of them. You can certainly explore those and others, but there are ever more certification possibilities where you can engage in some formal learning and also get some credential coming out of it. And then this is where I think we can go to breakouts, because I'd love for you all to get into discussion with each other in your small groups to talk about, if you're interested in moving to great South Florida. I think I've done that one too. Did I leave that one off? Because I meant to put that one on there, because I think I've
you had
been
it
through
on
that
there.
one.
Yes,
okay, good, because I went to that one too, and I thought it was pretty good. So let me see. So in your small groups, we can just have, how many people do we have total? 22, so maybe do 3 or 4 groups, something like that is fine.
So we have
And
4 groups that
Mhm.
have already been created, and so I can just distribute people across those, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. And so 3 questions. I'll share this. I think I can share this slide into the breakout in a moment. I should be able to do that. But in your small groups, you can talk about what do you feel is any inner work you need to do to kind of be prepared to do DI work? What are some of the activities maybe that you can get involved in from the standpoint of at work? And then if there's formal learning, what is a formal learning that you might want to engage in? So just having a little conversation with your peers to drum up some ideas, share experiences, and maybe, come up with some next steps for yourself if this is something you want to move forward with. So let's see, how are we doing on time? Maybe we'll do 7 minutes for this group. How does that sound?
Yes, that sounds good. When you're ready for me to open the rooms, I will go ahead. Jim and Megan, do you all want to hang out in the main chat, or would you like to be a part of a breakout?
I can always be a filler. If there are certain groups that are a little light on participants, I can certainly participate.
Okay,
I'm in the
sounds
same boat. I'm happy to help where needed.
okay. All righty. Well, I will do that and then go from there. I'm going to open the rooms now.
Okay.
So we'll make sure that each group at least has a couple people in it. It looks like there's at least 2 people in each group. They can network with each other a little bit.
Oop.
Uh-oh.
Can you put me back into group
Yes,
2?
I don't know what happened there. Let me assign you back to room 2. Why did that happen?
Sometimes Zoom plays tricks on us.
It's probably something I did. Who knows?
Well, it won't let me move you.
Jim, you messed it up.
It's always me. Troublemaker.
Just a second.
All right. I'm joining room 1 now. Okay.
I'm gonna move you back to, I had to, it wouldn't let me move him to room 2. It made me choose another room, so I just moved him back to room 2.
Okay. Now it puts me back again.
Oh no, good Lord.
Hmm.
Okay, it won't let me move you to room 2. I'm gonna move you to room 4
Okay.
because there's only 2 people there. And it looks like Lily is not in the breakout room. Okay.
All right. Hopefully everybody's somewhere.
And Megan, would you like me to move you to a room? Or are you good hanging out here? Uh-oh.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. It does look like room 3 only has 2 people, although at this point they've had a minute or 2 to kind of get started.
Okay.
Um,
I can move you over there if you like. I'll hang out here. Yeah, the kind of changed a bit.
I noticed a bunch of people dropped out as soon as I said breakout.
Yeah.
And this happens a lot too. It's like, oh, I don't want to be in a breakout. Okay, I'm dropping out.
Yeah, I think we may be good. There's 3 to each room. Well, it looks like
yeah, I'm showing, I guess, Lily is
you did
not.
not join. Okay. I can move you to room 3, and then if you want to come back, if they're already deep in discussion, then I can bring you back, or you can come back.
Okay.
I did see that we had 22, and it looks like we only have 14.
Yeah, a bunch. I saw the little in the chat, a bunch of people left as we were trying to set up the breakout. They're sneaky.
Yes.
Anyway,
I'll pause the recording for now. Let me pause.
oh yeah.
And sorry, started recording. Just a mix of some that are impacted by the legislation and some of us that are learning and seeing if this is an avenue that we want to pursue in our career, but definitely all agree to continuing to learn more about it through resources that are available, such as this webinar, SHRM, and other educational resources.
Great. Thank you, Jacqueline. Anyone else want to share from your groups? Any insights, thoughts?
Don't be shy.
And if not, I welcome you to, as Jacqueline said, continue to do your own work and research. One of the great things is there's lots of free resources available on the internet. You can Google, whether you want to Google on, there's like a 21-day challenge. You can Google stuff on allyship. I mean, there's just a ton of material out there. So whatever subtopic around DEI you want to look up psychological safety, you can find lots and lots of things to read about. So self-study is also an important part of this journey. And so I welcome you to continue to network with each other, to do your own self-study and exploration. And I want to turn it back to Kenya and team. Thank you so much, Jim, for helping to put this together. And I know you all have some more announcements as well for upcoming events.
Thank you so much, Judy. It was a pleasure hearing from you today. And thank you so much for sharing your time with Fort Worth HR and our community. It is much appreciated. And I hope everyone was able to learn a lot today from Judy. So I want to thank you everyone again for attending. If you enjoyed this particular session and if you were able to attend our previous session last week, the recordings will be made available on Fort Worth HR's website on the HR Career Series webpage. Also, please consider joining us for our next luncheon and legal update on July 27th. We will also continue this particular career series next Thursday with our session on HRIS and HR analytics. And then we will close the session on August 3rd with our session covering employment law. If you're not a member of Fort Worth HR, please consider joining us. Student memberships, I believe, are $30 for the year. Along with events such as this, you can take advantage of networking opportunities, professional development, certification preparation, as well as professional emphasis groups in your area of interest. Also, make sure to stay tuned for information about our HR Insights Conference for non-HR professionals that takes place on August 4th. Again, thank you all, everyone. If you have any questions for me, don't hesitate to reach out to me via LinkedIn and connect with all of us here and our speakers. And I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thank you again for attending.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Kenya. Have a great week.
Thank you, Jim. Oh, and thank you. I want to also thank Jim and Megan Halpenny. They are part of the committee that helped get this together. So I want to make sure to thank them both for their support and help in getting this together and throughout the sessions. Thank you, Jim and Megan.
See you all next week.
See you all next week.
Thank you.
Thanks for the session.
Thanks for coming.